And welcome back to the Right Path podcast, everyone, where being an author, an actual author, still matters. Folks, this is the podcast that is for authors. It's about authors. It's done by an author. And this is where we come together to share our journeys. We explore our creativity. And most importantly, we examine the why behind it all. Folks, our guest today, an incredible young man who I've had a great time talking with here at the beginning of the interview, and I cannot wait to introduce him. He is just under 20 years of law enforcement experience. He's a small town mystery and crime procedural writer, and I know we're going to get into that. He has published the first two of the books in his trilogy. They are Our Lady of the Overlook and Quiet Whispers of the Overlook. And we're going to hear about those two and hopefully about the third. We'll have to push him on that, see if he can give up some info. But please welcome to the show, Rodney R.L. Carpentier. How you doing, brother?
Good. How are you, Rory?
Oh, if I was any better, I'd be twins. But thank you for asking. I appreciate that. We're braving the weather today. You and I are
Yep,
fighting bad connections and everything else from both of our
absolutely.
places. But I really appreciate you coming on. I love talking to guys who have history in law enforcement, and have served like that. So thank you for everything you've done. Appreciate it very much. And I can't wait to hear about the books, man. But tell everybody a little bit about who is, Rodney Carpentier, man, and what made you get into all this.
Again, like you said, I've been in law enforcement for just shy of 20 years, and kind of got into that a little bit out of necessity. Got to have a job. But prior to that, I had been an English major in college. I was working out trying to maybe become a lawyer, and I decided that that wasn't the path. I was married young. I was 22 and needed some kind of career, so I ended up in law enforcement. But I was always kind of a creative person. I used to, make up stories and play in the woods in the backyard when I was a kid. And after I kind of got into studying literature and English literature and stuff like that, I kind of got very snobby about what I read and the things that I wanted to write. I wanted to be Faulkner. I wanted to be Ernest Hemingway. And, after trying to do that for a little bit, realizing I wasn't those guys, um, I realized, kind of put it to the back burner a little bit. And about almost 4 years ago, in 2022, I was working. At the time I was a sergeant, and I was working a double from the afternoon shift into the midnight shift. So about 2 o'clock in the morning, I'm sitting there trying to keep myself awake because, almost 12 hours in, and it was a very uneventful night because we don't use the Q word in law enforcement. And I'm head bobbing and just trying to doing whatever I can to keep awake. This idea just ran through my head, and I decided that I wasn't going to ignore it. And I kind of gave up the snobbiness, and I said, you know what, I want to write. I like crime mystery type books. I've always liked that stuff, and I'm like, I'm gonna take this idea and I'm gonna run with it.
Wow. Okay. All right. So this just comes to you one night like this.
Yeah, out of the blue. And the idea was, um, what if, as the someone grew up in an adopted family, knowing you were adopted, you get to that point in your life where you're like, I want to know about my past, and DNA and these 23andMe or whatever, all these things exist out there. What if you finally did that, but the results you got were that your biological mother was the unknown victim of a cold case homicide,
Wow.
and you just open up a whole
Okay.
new can of worms. So that was the original idea. It completely transformed as the writing process, and I'm sure we'll get into that. But that was the initial idea. That was the initial nugget, and I don't know why it came through my head at that time of night in that place. And but when it did, it was kind of like, this is too good to ignore. Like, I'd come up with ideas before, and it didn't motivate me quite like this idea did. And I remember I was working the double because I wanted to take the next day, my next shift, the next shift off. And my wife and I were going camping and hiking in the Catskills. which we'll get into also.
Right.
And and I just remember it was burnt. It just, you say money burns a hole in your pocket. Well, this idea was burning a hole in my brain. Like so I sat down and I just explained to him, like, honey, I'm just going to talk for a while. Listen to this idea. Tell me what you think. And she's, creative person herself to a degree. And she's like, oh, okay. I don't know what you're going to do with it, but okay. So, and just never kind of looked back.
Nice. Nice. I've tried that exact same thing with my wife. It's like, hey, just let me talk for a minute. It'll all make sense in a minute because the first couple of sentences are going to have her going, wait, what?
Yeah.
Right. I love that though. That's great that you guys can have that communication. And I mean, I take it she was behind you, on the project.
Uh, she didn't really have anything to say negative, as long as I still had my day job and, the health benefits and the salary, all as long as all that was coming in, she didn't care what I did in my spare time.
Right.
And that's the ironic part is at that point I was working the afternoon shift. So my daughter goes to school in the morning. My wife works from home, but she's on Zoom phone calls all day.
Yeah.
So when I first started working on this, I had all morning to work on writing and things like that. And since then, I've gotten really important at work and it's ruining my life. So
Those
I
aren't things you
got
normally hear sandwiched
yeah,
together.
yeah. So I work for a sheriff's office, and the sheriff is an elected position, and there was a changeover in administrations. The previous sheriff retired, and after 20 years of service as sheriff, on top of his law enforcement career prior to that, so we had a new sheriff come into office, and the people that he put into higher power liked me, which wasn't necessarily the case in the previous administration. And so I started getting moved. I had some seniority as a sergeant at that point, so I finally got moved to day shift. And then they started giving me other responsibilities that were less direct supervision and kind of more of the administrative stuff. So I did what I was told. And this past year, past July, I got promoted to lieutenant. So now I'm really important at work. Like they moved me down. My office is next to the sheriff's office and right next to the chief. And so she can come find me anytime she needs to. So no time to write
Wow.
anymore. That's the end of that is I don't have time to write anymore because I'm up early and I'm at work and I have things to do all day. And by the time I get home, my brain's pretty much fried. And
Gotcha.
so, we'll get to the third book, but the third book is been kind of like the dental appointment I just came back. It's like pulling teeth.
Well, okay. First, congratulations on the promotion, because we
Thank
all
you.
have to take care of our day jobs, man.
Absolutely.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. Until your book is selling enough that you can bow out, but until then, I mean, hey, keep the day job for sure.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
yeah, I totally understand that. That is something I love to dig into that a little bit because that's something that like all of us who have, whether it's podcasts or books or anything we're trying to do. You have to do it as a side hustle first before you can make it a full-time gig. But that's something that we all kind of run into is where do you find the time to
Hmm.
do that when you're trying to be a full-time person and a full-time husband and a full-time father, right?
Yep.
How are you carving out time to figure that out?
So ironically, I did a podcast sometime last year, all about efficiency, and it was like the Minute Mastery podcast it was called. And it was a great little talk, and I talked about how I compartmentalized my time, and work was work, and family time was family time, and writing time was writing time. And it's just the way that's worked is the writing time has been carved out more and more. My daughter um plays sports.
Oh,
So and last year I decided it was a great idea because they had no one else to become a volleyball coach. I've never coached volleyball. I never played volleyball, but I'm a volleyball coach now. My wife and I coached soccer last year. I also coached track. I never ran track, but the people ask you to help out. It's like you can't say no, especially
right.
when you want your kid involved. And the best way for them to be involved is you just kind of, take that on. So,
Yep.
that eats up my fall and my spring. So this is supposed to be the time to be writing. And, we talked about the weather, we talked about, just life in general. And like I said, it's hard to find time to write. In 2024, yeah, the fall of 2024, I did NaNoWriMo, the last NaNoWriMo, the last official NaNoWriMo. I did that, and I said I'm going to write to 50,000 words, and I'm going to do it. And I I did it. I made the goal. I did like 53,000 words, and it wasn't easy, but I was able to do it. This year I tried to do it. I maybe did 17,000 words
Ouch. Yeah.
in the month, and it was like I had an entire newsletter. It was just like I failed, and I failed epically. Like I didn't even get remotely close.
Right.
And it's just but it's just, it's life, and you gotta take both of it with it, so um but I also look at the time that I do get a chance to write as a lot more precious,
Mhm.
and I try to make the most of it. So,
Good for you.
and
Yeah.
so, so it's just you got to find that time. If it's I typically write in sprints. And so what I'll do is I'll get my iPhone and it'll say, "Hey Siri, set me an alarm for 15 minutes," and it'll
Wow.
count
Okay.
down, and I'll take those 15 minutes and I'll just go. There's no thinking. It's almost like a flash fiction kind of thing. Like I know where I was, I know where I want to go, and it's just let's get as far as we can down the path in the book to, that time's up. And if that time's up and I don't have any more time, I'll stop. If I can get another one in, I usually kind of, after 15 minutes of concentration, I kind of try to get up and walk around. I'm a big electronic drum set guy. So I'll put something fast and aggressive on, and it just kind of gets the muscles moving. I did that before I came on the podcast just to, kind of loosen everything up and, kind of brain fog it away.
Yeah.
And I'll jump right back in and I'll try to do another 10 or 15 minutes. So it's just, but it's just that those pockets of time are smaller and smaller and less frequent than I would really like to at this point.
Sure. I love that you're able to do that. I've heard of people who try to do like power hours, and they set up a time. Hey, I'm going to write. It's going to be at this time. I'm going to set it up and I'm going to sit down and nothing's getting in my way. And then they sit down and they stare at the page like, now
Yeah.
what? Just nothing comes to them. So I know it's tough to kind of write from the creative because you don't know when it's going to hit you, and you almost have to be in the mood to write. But this is this
Sometimes.
is this is a discipline that you've taught yourself. It sounds like to kind of knock this out. I mean, you feel like you're productive doing that? That's amazing, really.
I find that unproductive. I'm not. The first book, I was very much a plotter. Um,
Sure.
because when I was trying to figure out how to write it, again, I had this idea, and I started kind of messing around with how I was going to do it, and I started looking at, I got all the creative writing books I had in college. And, I got Story by Robert McKee, and I took a screenwriting class. So I took out my Sid Field screenwriting book, and I'm reading about the hero's journey and the, all this stuff. And I'm trying to do that. And I still have the notes from that because I like making a lot of notes. I like looking back at them later, like, yeah, see where this came from? It's kind of like, the baby pictures of the book. And
Right.
so I'm doing all this, and it's just not working for me. And I was trying to do like a dual timeline kind of thing where I was following one character and then a second character, and we were going like this. It was supposed to be parallel, and they were going to meet in the middle. And after a while, I was like, I'm cutting out half of the book, and I'm just going to focus on this one character, and I'll still bring in that other character in the middle. But I'm not gonna do this, try to build two stories at once. And I'm like, I need to figure out how to do this. So podcasts and YouTube videos and stuff. And that's how I found Save the Cat, which saved my life because it just unlocked that, you know, that thing inside my brain that said, ah, this is how you do it.
Hmm.
I'm big movie buff. I love watching movies, and Save the Cat it just talking about the beat sheets and where you're going. And so the first book, I really kind of plotted out. So when I was writing that and putting the time into that, I knew where I was kind of going. I had a roadmap, and it was a lot, pretty easy. Second book, I wrote very quickly. I started writing that in September last year, um, in September of 24. Um, right before the first book came out, I started writing the second book, And I had that first draft done by the end of the year. So I wrote 103,000 words in about 4 months. Again, having the NaNoWriMo and having that motivation in there helped get the second book, you know, across the finish line.
Right.
And that's how I was able to I released the first book and the second book in the series of the trilogy um, 10 months apart. You know, Our Lady came out in October, the end of October of 24, and Quiet Whispers came out in September, the end of August of 25.
Got it.
And I've been trying to write the third book ever since, and I'm halfway. I'm just past the midpoint, and I have my roadmap, and I know kind of where I want to go. It's just kind of, putting gas in the car and getting us down the road is still we're sluggish,
Sure.
and there's also a lot more going on. Like you talked about work, when you talk about side hustle and trying to make this work, now I have to worry about marketing and my Amazon ads. And, if I'm going to post on social media, doing podcasts. I do a ton of podcasts, because I love talking to other writers. I love talking to different people who are doing creative things
Yeah.
and finding new audiences that way. So I have all this other stuff kind of monopolizing my free time too. Like, oh, I got to update the website because it still says I have 18 years in law enforcement. I'm almost 20, because I haven't updated it because that's on the list of things to do. Or,
Right.
I've gone to a ton of writing conferences to try to, you know, learn from learn from the people that have been doing this for a long time and try to get, new ways of thinking, new ways of writing, new ways of doing the business end of things, meeting people. And, it all kind of takes your time, and just that writing time just kind of gets smaller and smaller. So I gotta figure out a way to get the most for my money in that time now.
Yeah, for sure. The let me back up for 1 second, just because this is a
Sure.
trilogy of books, and you got book one
Yes.
out, you got book two out, you're working on book three. I'm curious, did this start off as, hey, I'm going to do a trilogy, and here's how it's going to work, or was it I have this story, and the more I'm putting it down, it ends up being a trilogy?
Um, the second thing, it again, the idea came through my head, and I kind of had the first book, and I was like, things are more and more, um, because the other thing I started doing when I wanted to write was I needed to do books and read books in the genre and kind of see what things were like nowadays.
Sure. Yeah.
You know, again, my heroes are Faulkner and Hemingway and people from the Lost Generation. We don't write that way anymore. That's not how books are written. So I needed
Right.
to kind of get a sense of what, just understand tropes and things like that. So I started listening to a lot of books. One of the first ones I did was I did Dennis Lehane's uh, series. Gone Baby Gone
Hmm.
was one of the was a film that was made from one of the books, and that's like the second or third in the series. So I listened to the whole series. I forgot the name of the detectives. I'm sure somebody will, be yelling at the podcast player and like that's it. But I did his series, and the more I kind of listen to, I'm like everything that I'm finding is at least a trilogy or a series. And a lot of podcasts and author things will be like, oh, series are dead. And I'm like, but everybody seems to be pushing in a series. So I was like, well, I don't have to be done with one book. So let me wrap up the first book, and then and make it, I always use the original Star Wars trilogy, like the end of A New Hope. That could end, you didn't need to have two other movies. It's the end of the movie. Han and Chewie and Luke get their medals, and everybody's happy. They're clapping, and it could just be a one-off movie. So that's where
Absolutely. Yeah.
I kind of wanted to end it. I wanted to end it with, okay, if I never wrote anything else, tied up in a bow. But then once I started working on the second book and I started kind of changing perspectives on what you kind of knew in the first book and kind of pulling the rug out a little bit, and now I ended this one a little, and I'm not going to compare myself to Empire Strikes Back, but at the end of Empire, there's this kind of this feeling of, it's just there's just a vacuum there. Like, wait a minute, no spoiler, I guess, Darth Vader is Luke's dad, and what does he do with that? You want to
Right.
watch the third movie in order to find out what's going on with that, and Han Solo is in carbonite, and there's all these threads that are now hanging out there. So you need to have the trilogy to finish in order to understand what the whole story is.
Sure.
So, and that's kind of where I wanted to leave at the end of the second book, and then the third book, now I've written a bunch of checks, and now I have to cash them all to make sure that everything makes sense at the end. And there's going to be, there are people that are waiting to find out how it all wraps up in the end.
Nice. Is there any chance that there's so much that needs to be wrapped up that it turns into four books?
I don't think so. I've only been working on this since 2022. I feel like I'm done with this story.
Ah,
Like
okay.
I feel like I can wrap up this story, but I already have other ideas. I already have other, I'm already looking at other girls. It's the meme with the guy walking and he's got the pretty girl and he's looking behind him at the other, it's that point now where I'm like, all right, I want to be done with the Overlook because I want to move on to something else. And I have a whole new series. It's going to be in the same kind of world, and there's
Yeah.
going to be carryover characters, kind of, a little bit like, Better Call Saul. Like you took some of the characters from Breaking Bad and,
Right.
you merged them in there and you kind of gave them a whole second life. And that's kind of what I want to do with this new series. And this is going to be more of a, um, like a Michael Conley Bosch series where, each one's going to build on each other, but you could just read one book and be cool with it. Maybe you want to know the history, but you could really kind of enter the series anywhere. And I kind of want to have a little bit more of a more accessible kind of series like that, and do maybe 6 or 7 books of that, and see where that goes.
Nice.
This feels like a nice bow with a trilogy and being done. And I'd really like to move on to a new idea and see where that takes me.
Beautiful. All right. I love that. Absolutely love that. So, and I love your referencing that you keep throwing out there. I mean, you went from like Star Wars to, Breaking Bad to these are
I love
these
I love
great
I
things to
love good
compare.
I love good storytelling, and
Yeah,
when the storytelling's good, the storytelling's good.
absolutely. That's a good rule to live by, I think. So, now one of the things that you say in your bio is that you only write from true life. Okay. And I know that, with your law enforcement background, that seems like something that makes sense. All right, folks. Hey, we're battling weather, like we said at the beginning, and looks like we're back on. So let me kind of finish that question, Rodney, about you have a thing in your bio where you only write from true life. And with your law enforcement background, that seems to make a lot of sense for the genre that you're writing about, of course. But your everything that you do seems to be around the Catskills and in mountains and stuff. Where does that come from? What's the story there?
So, I'm originally from upstate New York, kind of in the shadow of the Catskill Mountains, and I currently live about 30 miles north of New York City. So, the Catskills is kind of an escape for us. We started hiking up there about 10 years ago, 10, 11 years ago. My wife kind of got this idea that we were going to do what's called the Catskill 3500s. It's 35 mountains over 3,500 feet, and they are far, they're spread out. And so, it's not something that's really, you kind of take lightly. It's a little bit of investment in time. There are people that can do it in like, a week, but you're really hustling. So we did it over about 7 years, where we would do a couple of trips up there. And just the more that we went up there, it was, again, it was a kind of that escape. It was a place we went to that was outside of work and outside of even family, because we were going up there. It was the two of us, and we had a third friend that was joining us on a lot of our adventures for a while. But in the end, it was just my wife and I. And then we started kind of, our between Christmas and New Year's break, we would go up there and stay at a bed and breakfast, and we would do some hiking or we'd explore. We started going up there for anniversaries, which is during the summer. So we were going up there, camping and hiking and just staying up there for leisure and more and more. And when this idea ran through my head, I knew it had to be, you know, you know, for it to be a cold case that kind of, is completely kind of forgotten about, and that's the narrative is framed by a true crime podcaster who's kind of digging up this story and kind of shining light on it. I'm like, well, it can't be in like a metropolitan area. It needs
Mm.
to be somewhere where, there are secrets and there are, it's a mystery. So I'm like, naturally the Catskills, and it was kind of a different world, and it was a place that I could kind of be grounded in, um and just, not be my everyday, but just kind of follow along this, and just kind of really fit for what I was trying to do. Small town. I didn't want, you know, I mentioned like Michael Conley earlier, or some other procedural writers. They come from, or they bring in like these big agencies that have all these different people that do all these specialty things. And in a small agency, small police agency, the guy who is directing traffic is also the guy who does all the crime scene stuff, who also is the guy who, picks up the checks from the town hall, and so I really kind of wanted to play that up, and I nothing but the Catskills were just a great area to kind of do all those different elements and still have some familiarity.
Nice. Okay, great. And again, that's, writing from, true life. That's what you know. And so, we all have a certain degree of our own, personality, our own lives in our stories, somewhere. So, I love that you're open about that, and that's how you do it. The characters that are in your stories. Um, how do you come up with your characters, and are you one of them?
A lot of people, so the main character of the Overlook trilogy is a young police officer, rookie named Mike Ellis. A lot of people say, "Oh, was that you?" I'm like, it was me at one point, because I was a new cop at one point, and a lot of what he's feeling is kind of that, but he's also not me. He's also a combination of a bunch of young deputies that kind of came through my shift for a while, and kind of, um, you know, it's a different generation. That he's in that than when I started. So I kind of wanted to bring in and kind of have it really feel like it was, now. So Mike is sort of me, but he's also not me. And then his good buddy on the police department is this guy named Hugh. So he was mostly my partner from when I first started, but he's also me because he's kind of got, he's, in his 40s, and he's grumpy, and um, he just kind of, wants to do his job, but also doesn't really want to, go kick over too many stones and kind of make more trouble for himself. So, so I put myself in there a little bit, but a lot of the characters are just combinations and amalgamations of people I've worked with over the years. And I kind of just, hey, let's take this trait and that trait and kind of, put them together and kind of, let the Play-Doh kind of come out and as a different person, but kind of has some of these combination of personality traits.
Nice, nice. Okay, I appreciate your openness on that. And your honesty. Some people are like, "Oh no, 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 nothing, none of this is me." So that's
Oh no,
really cool.
there's a ton of me in there, and there's a ton of family lore and family history too, because I found out over the years that my parents actually fell in love in the Catskills. They would
Oh,
go up there. My dad grew up in the city of Albany, and my mom also, and they met each other in Albany. But my dad and my grandfather was an avid hunter, so he'd go up to the Catskills when they were kids, and they'd go up to their hunting camp. And this hunting camp was, that's where, he was, 16, 17, 18 years old, running around with his girlfriend, trying not to get caught by the farmer, who owned the land,
right.
and so, and I had a long, my mom passed away in 2016, and
Sorry, man.
probably, oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Probably 2018 or 2019. It was before COVID. Uh, I got together with my dad on their anniversary, and we ended up taking a drive up through the Catskills, and we actually found the hunting cabin. I had never been there. My grandfather had sold it right around when I was born. Um, and my dad's reminiscing and telling me all these, interesting stories and stuff about, again, about, the courtship between he and my mom. And we met the guy who actually bought the place from my grandfather. He still owns the place, and he went, he actually invited us inside, and he still had pictures and mementos from my grandfather that my grandfather left there. So it was a really cool kind of trip. And then it kind of works out that this idea came to me about 6 weeks after my father passed away in 2022. So you talk about the Catskills and the kind of this history stuff, with family, it all kind of coalesced together for me, and it kind of became a little bit of an outlet also to kind of talk about family secrets and family things that were kind of buried in there also. Um, and it really didn't have an outlet, and just assumptions that I had to make and kind of, lines I had to draw that I could no longer ask about. I couldn't ask my dad about things anymore. I couldn't, I didn't have my mom to ask
Yeah.
about those things. So I kind of tied some of those things together.
That's fascinating, man. It really is, and you can tell that that means something to you. So when your book takes on that kind of meaning, then it's just a little more special what you're writing. So I think
Yeah.
that's really cool too. Very, very cool. The whenever we're writing our books, I think most of us have kind of an idea or maybe a picture, an image. Maybe we have it all mapped out, but we're writing the book either to somebody or we're writing it for somebody, in some capacity. Is that the case with you? And if so, who are you writing your books and the trilogy to or for?
So the first book, you open up title page, that says, "Mom, I finally finished a mystery." Because when I was a little guy, I used to enjoy mystery books. I've been reading Sherlock Holmes since I was about 6 years old. I always loved that. My mom would read to me for a while, and then I still have it too. It's probably about that thick and about that wide, but it's the whole collection of Sherlock Holmes. It's blue, and I got that at the Scholastic Book Fair when I was in like first or second grade. And so I always kind of liked that. So on Sundays, cold, wintry Sundays or a rainy Sunday, we'd be lounging around and I'd say, "Hey, Mom, I want to write a mystery." And, she'd, entertain that. And we would sit down and we would try to pretend to make up characters and stuff. Uh, and of course, I didn't know how to plot a story at that point or exactly what I was doing, but, it was fun. It was something that we did, a
Yeah.
couple of times, and it stuck in my memory. So when I finally finished the book, I was like, well, so that first book was a lot for my mom. And then the second book, I dove a lot deeper into. So Mike's kind of thing is he's a rookie cop, and he's working for the same department his dad was the police chief for. His dad's been deceased for about 6 or 7 years, and basically, he talked about the original idea was about a cold case homicide, somebody finding out that they're related to this person. So what I did was I took it and said, well, what about the cops? And so Mike's dad was the first officer on scene 40 years ago when this cold case occurred. So he kind of lived with this his entire career. He was a rookie at the time, and now Mike, 40 years later, is starting out as a police officer working for the same department. He stumbles upon a modern day murder case. So now there's a lot of parallels between them, and so the first book is really he's really motivated to try to figure out his case. And basically the cold case kind of gets in the way and kind of complicates things for him, and kind of is more of a distraction than him being able to work on this modern day case. So the second book, um, because there's a little bit of a resolution in the first book, the second book kind of becomes more of Mike trying to understand his dad. And so at the beginning of that book, the dedication says, "Dad, this one's for you." So I dedicated that one to my father because we're really getting into kind of that idea. I won't speak for everybody, but I remember when I was a kid, my dad worked for the same company for 40 plus years. And when I was 16, I needed to have a job. And so he got me summer employment working for the same company. They owned some, business property. So I weed eated and mowed the lawn and painted
Mhm.
stuff.
Sure.
But the first day I went to what they call the shop, and all the guys are there, and all the men are outside drinking their coffee and smoking their cigarettes, and they stood out there until it was time to start, and so I get introduced to everybody, and they all know my dad, and they don't know me from Adam. But, there's kind of this, you should be like your dad. And he had kind of built up this reputation. He was a steady guy. They loved him. I'm the third, so he was Rod, and I was
Wow.
always junior, even though I'm the third, I was junior. That's what they called me. And, kind of, and then you get into the hazing part of, like, you know, growing up and having to earn your way. And I really wanted to kind of bring that stuff out for Mike too. And like you said, is any character like you? I'm like, it's part of, uh, you know, I'll speak as a male, at manhood and getting your first job, and you kind of got to earn your way and you got to prove who you are. And I had to do the same thing when I was a state correction officer. They have their ways of testing you to see if they can trust you. Same thing with when I became a deputy sheriff and working. You know, there's just these entry points that you have to kind of pass to make sure that you're not to make sure that and again it's trust. It's the value, um, and just and I just remember back to when I was living in my dad's shadow and what that was like.
Wow. That that's wow, man. I appreciate you sharing all that. I really do. That's something. If you don't mind me asking, and you don't have to answer if it's a secret or you don't want to announce it yet, but who gets the dedication on the third book then?
I got to finish it first. I don't know yet. I gotta see how I feel. I don't have that set up yet.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, hey, can't blame a guy for asking, trying to get
No, not at all.
get the story. But I love that. One thing everybody always wants to hear about, and I get a lot of questions about this type of thing a lot with this podcast, is when you go ahead and you get it published. Now, you and I talked about Amazon a little bit. Did you go with a traditional publisher? Did you self-publish, or did you do a hybrid somewhere in between?
I self-published.
Okay, excellent.
Um, yeah.
Any
So I
particular
was,
decision about that, or just that's what
s-
felt right?
so I was writing the book, um, and I have another coworker who's also a writer. He writes in the horror genre.
Hmm?
And he had a ton of success, and he kind of started right before COVID, and so he's kind of built himself up. He's got a bunch of titles out there, so he kind of went before me, and it worked out. I've known him my entire career. He was the academy class after me, so we've known each other for nearly 20 years.
Wow.
And so again, I had just gotten to day shift as a sergeant, and we had a big call where there was a tour bus that left the highway and major accident. A bunch of kids are going to band camp. So it was a mass casualty kind of incident. It was a big deal. And this guy was one of the first responders, and he screwed up his back helping
Mm.
out at that because it was down an embankment and they're trying to bring people up. So he hurt his back. So after he hurt his back, he was on light duty. So they put him on our communications desk. And my desk was here. The communications desk was right there. So I'm sitting there and I've been working on it, and I think I was just about finished with the original first draft, and I didn't know which way to go. And again, been listening to podcasts and listening to YouTube videos and just getting a bunch of different opinions and things like that. And so I'm like, well, he's already been there, so let me ask him. So I
Yeah,
said, "Hey, Dad, I wrote a book." He's like, "Hey, good for you." Like it was, it's kind of like, admitting that and kind of putting it out there is difficult at first, because it's not a typical thing like, I'm a writer,
sure.
but again, but again, he was very receptive, and he's like, so he talked to me about it. He's like, listen, he was self-published. For the most part, he had done some hybrid, and I think he just actually signed with a publisher for some new projects he's doing. So he's kind of done it all. But at the time, I was asking him about self-publishing, and he kind of said, he said, you could go trad, but you're going to have to wait. And it's like, all right, I understand that, because you're going to have to find an agent. You're going to have to, after you get an agent, you're going to have to try to sell the book. And while you're selling the book, it's going to be 2, 3 years before you get that, and that's quick. So I was like, all right, so I took that into consideration. So, but in the meantime, I wanted to keep moving forward. So finished my first draft, put it down, picked it up, did a second draft, put it down, did a third draft, and finally I was like, all right, someone else needs to read this. So I wasted a ton of money printing advanced reader copies and gave it to a couple of people that I trusted.
Yeah.
None of them read it. So to this day, none of them have read it. So I spent
Yeah.
probably $300 doing printing at Staples that for something nobody ever read.
Yeah.
But that, again, you live, you learn.
Right.
So I went on Readsy, and that's where I found my editor. And I had such a great experience working with that editor. She was fabulous. Her name's J.R. Bowles. She did a fabulous job with the edit and explaining everything. And she was communicative, and she gave me great notes. And then after all that was done, she actually does a 90-minute Zoom meeting with you. So you could ask anything. And I pretty much had like a small notebook full of questions. And I just went, like, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? And I want to switch this scene to that scene. And she's like, no, it's fine. And it kind of built up my confidence. And so in the meantime, I also reached out and I found a somebody to design a cover, and I put that out there. And so I had a cover design, um, and this woman, her name is Dana Steele. She knocked it out of the park first. I got the two ideas she had. I opened up the first one. I said, "Well, that's it." And I'm like, well, let me see the second one at least. And I'm like, okay, well, that's not it. So I showed it to my wife and my daughter, and like, that's perfect. Um, and then I got it proofread. So everything was done. And I'm just sitting on, a done manuscript. I'm like, what do I do now? So I went, so in August of 2024, I went to a writers conference, mystery writers conference called Killer Nashville. And that was such an eye-opening experience for me. Went down there, I met, all these, big authors, medium authors, starting out authors, people who were in the same boat as me, some people that were, maybe in, just across the shore from where I was. Like
Yeah.
it was such an eye-opening experience. And I did every breakout session I did was like a business oriented thing, like how to present yourself as a writer, how to do taxes, how to, market and all these things. So I'm like, I think I can really do this. And I came back from that and I said, you know what? I'm going to self-publish. I'm not waiting. I'm not,
There you
because they
go.
had they had they had they had agents and publishers there, and I looked at the anxiety of so many of these guys that were waiting to go to these sessions to show their manuscript, and I'm like, all right, that's they were so hell bent on doing the trad thing, and I was like, I'd rather just control this myself at this point. Not I need to get it out. I have it. It's done.
Yeah.
I need to get it out. And I got back from that, and about 6 weeks later, I released the book, which was in the long run not the way to do that. Again, you live, you learn. Uh, a 6 week turnaround from saying, hey, I'm a writer, I'm going to release a book to, hey, my book's out was, didn't give a lot of lead time. So
Yeah.
I found some other podcasts to learn about marketing and how to do that. And I went to a different conference on how to do better job, marketing my novel. So with the second one, I actually did like a whole 6 month thing, and kind of get a little bit more experience with that. Uh, but I just said at that point I need to get this out, and that was nothing was going to stop me. And it's been a little bit of a roller coaster ride ever since. Kind of like you know, but
That's yeah.
it's so normalized now. Like my sheriff, I knew him when I started. He was a sergeant with the sheriff's office, and kind of followed him up in his career. He retired as a captain and then ran for sheriff after a couple years. So I've known him for years, and anytime he introduces me to somebody now, he's like, "Hey, this is Lieutenant Carpentier. He's a writer." I'm like, "Hey, thanks, boss." So
Nice.
so it's just kind of accepted. And in my family, it's kind of everybody knows about it, and people started asking me like, "Hey, can I get a copy?" I'm like, sure, right here. You know, I've learned to start carrying books with me, always be prepared.
Right.
And, at this point, the cat's out of the bag. Everything's kind of, been rolling with it for so long that it just kind of is what it is.
Right.
And um so, I enjoy the self-publishing. I enjoy kind of controlling my own destiny a little bit. If I get a market, I might as well market for myself.
Right.
Although now that I'm part of some writers groups and I'm talking to writers who actually have publishers that, will send their books to places or pay for them to go to conferences
Hmm.
so that, I don't have to foot my own bill. That's kind of nice too. So, this new series that I was kind of talking about, a long time ago, uh, I may write up a bunch of them and try to sell that to a traditional publisher. Now that I kind of set up my platform a little bit, maybe that'll work. We'll see. And if it doesn't, I'll just self-publish.
Right. Yeah. Worst case scenario, do what you did before,
Correct.
and keep trying to figure out social media and move forward. Right.
Right.
So, oh, absolutely. I appreciate you sharing that information, and that journey, because there's a lot of folks where that's just such a big, scary thing for them.
Yeah, it
Hey,
is.
got the book, but now what? And they
Yeah.
start to
Well,
panic.
yeah, you feel like you're on, on the precipice of the cliff, and it's like you just gotta let go and let things be the way they are, and
Right.
for the most part, as long as you do that process and you have professionals looking at it and giving you feedback and you're taking that feedback and you're turning it around, you're gonna be fine and people will read your book,
Yeah.
which is, I guess, also scary because people start talking to you about your book and asking you questions and criticizing you a little bit, especially friends of yours at the job who, want to bust your chops a little bit,
Right.
because they're like, is this me? I'm like, no, it's not you. Okay, maybe a little bit was you.
Right. Just a little tiny bit, but really
Yeah,
it's not you.
exactly.
Right. It's everybody else. I love that. Listen, as we start to kind of wrap this up, I love the story behind your book. I really do. I love everything you're doing with it, and I love how open you are, just sharing all this stuff. I hope that's some of the stuff you put out on social media. Is some of this open story to get people interested in the book. But before we get to our last question, tell everybody how they can reach you, how they can find the book, that type of thing, and we'll certainly have it in the show notes. But tell them where to go look.
So, first and foremost, I'm on Amazon. I'm a Kindle Unlimited. If you're a part of that, and the first book is on Audible exclusively, audiobook. Working on getting a second book done. Got to find that money capital to work too a little bit. So Amazon, Kindle Unlimited, and Audible are the main ways. If you're interested in more of a direct thing, you want a signed copy from me, you can go through my website, rlcarpentierwriter.com. And you can sign up for my newsletter. I do that every 2 weeks now. It used to be every week. That got a little too crazy. So we're every 2 weeks now. And I'm on social media on Facebook, Instagram, and I always tell people I think I have a TikTok. I haven't been on it in so long, but I do have a New Year's resolution to do more of the social media stuff. So there might be some TikToks out there soon. I don't know.
Gotcha. All right, that's awesome. Well, you've given a lot of really good advice to people too, as we've been going through the interview, and I appreciate that very much. I know the listeners will too. But as we kind of, finish up and wrap up here, what's your best piece of advice that you can give to folks? As someone who is a published author and has been through this grind now, what's your best piece of advice to folks who are not yet published and would like to be?
So my best piece of advice on the writing end of things is just keep moving forward. Don't. Uh, I'm a person that is just get the first draft done. Get get the ideas and the thoughts out there. Don't worry about what you wrote. Don't worry about the grammar necessarily or making sure that, eye color from chapter 1 matches with chapter 10. That's what an editor's for. That's what, proofreading is for. That's what going back is for. Get the idea out there. Keep moving forward. Keep spilling, spilling ink on the page, words on the screen. Keep moving forward. Get to the end. And when you get to
Nice.
the end, then you can, then you accomplish something, and then the work can begin. And that's when you go back. Like I said, I typically finish a first draft. I put it down for a month, 30 days. I don't look at it, I don't touch it, I don't do anything with it. I don't even think about it. And then I'll pick it back up and I'll go back and be like, what the hell were you thinking? That doesn't work. What are you doing?
Right.
Then you can have all those doubts and yell at yourself, but at least you have something to work with.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, molding that clay a little bit and then going back and saying, well, that doesn't look like, that doesn't look like Michelangelo or that doesn't look like David. And then you go back
Right.
and then you start making those details. And so don't stop looking back. Keep going forward.
Beautiful. Great advice. I love that so much. All right. Folks, author of the first two books of his trilogy, Our Lady of the Overlook and Quiet Whispers of the Overlook. Rodney, do you want to give the title for the third book, or is that a secret?
You know what? I don't know when this will come out, so it may be out by then.
Okay.
So I do have a title for
Okay.
this one. It is going to be called Most Precious Blood of the Overlook.
Wow. Most Precious Blood. Okay, I love that. I mean, if you're going to end a trilogy, you do it with a title like that, brother. I love that. Okay, so that is the trilogy of The Overlook right there. Author Rodney R.L. Carpentier. Rodney, thank you so much, man, for
Thank
just
you, Rory. I
everything
really
you shared.
appreciate it.
It was great
I
having
had
you
a
here
great
today.
time.
Thank you so much. All right, folks, that's been another just fantastic episode of the Right Path podcast, where the truth still matters and words still have power. Folks, this is the place for authors who absolutely know that every page is a step forward. So let's lift each other up, let's dust each other off, and let's all move forward together.